Restaurant Unstoppable. What the most successful restaurateurs know that you don't. With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, CEO and founder of 84 Hospitality, Rachel Cope. Are you feeling unstoppable today?
I am glad to be here.
I am glad to have you here. The things that have been said about you over the past week and a half,
scary,
all good things. We're sitting in front of a really great person right now. From what I've heard, no pressure.
We'll see what you think by the end of this, but that's super nice.
Right. So I like to start every episode by having my guest share a success quote or mantra to get that motivational ball rolling. What do you have for us today?
Okay, I let you know that this is actually tattooed on my body. I got this tattoo in Denver about a year and a half ago with my sister. It just says "Figure It Out," and that tattoo is actually facing like up towards me. So just to remind myself that no one's going to do it for me and that there's always a solution. And that's the mindset that we take with our staff and all of our restaurants and
I love that. Every
aspect of life. Keep it short and sweet and just figure it out. So
when I hear you say that, I think of someone we both know, Bruce Irving.
Oh, yeah.
From the Smart Pizza Marketing Podcast, good friend of ours, who says everything's figure-outable.
Yeah.
I think I might have figure-outable, I think is what he says.
I like it.
But it's just the mentality that, like, you can figure it out. Especially in today's age, there's no shortage of resources, information to teach you how to do stuff. Just figure it out, right?
Yep.
I love that. Great way to get this thing started. So from what I could gather, it sounds like you were working in restaurants throughout college, maybe post-college. When did it all start for you?
So the first restaurant I ever worked in, well, a little background is I was an athlete all the way through college.
Okay.
So that was really my first love.
What were you playing?
I was playing softball, played a little bit of basketball, but don't like to run, so that turned out to not be that great. But yeah, so when I was in high school, the summer after my senior year, parents made me get a job.
Okay.
And was working at On the Border Mexican restaurant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And for a person that's never worked in a restaurant before, like myself at that time, it was quite the experience.
Yeah, they're a pretty decent-sized organization, aren't they?
Yeah, it used to be owned by Brinker. I'm not sure if that's correct now, but that's like Chili's and Applebee's, that kind of stuff. But it was a hell of an experience for an 18-year-old kid who had never worked in a restaurant before. Super high-paced and just a lot of what I didn't want to be.
Okay.
So I try to pull experience from everywhere I've ever worked, and that was probably the first
not to
part of that.
Put anybody on blast, but what was it that you didn't want to be?
A lot of it was just the way they handled the guest, and there was a really strong rule book. It was super corporate, and we use that term, in such a negative way sometimes. But as you grow, you have to create some standards for yourselves and some consistency between your stores. But the way that you handle the guests and the way that you handle your staff, I feel like we're still in charge of and acting in their favor. And I didn't see a lot of that in that experience when I worked for that restaurant. So,
well, give me an example. What do you mean by how they handled the guests?
If there was a problem with a dish or something, it was almost impossible to get a manager to take it off the ticket or do something in favor of the guest.
Changed a lot over the years.
In which direction?
Generally, if the guest doesn't like it, it's a marketing expense to make it right.
Right.
I've
seen restaurants even locally not so long ago here. I remember seeing a note behind their bar because I'm always creeping, when I'm eating places. But I think it said nothing is for free. And it really rubbed me the wrong way.
Well, I mean, that's the world we came from. And I think when I started this podcast, I mean, part of what I was trying to do was to give the independent restaurant owner the understanding of the financial side of things, like the less sexy stuff,
Right.
But there is a balance to be struck with, there's rigidity that you need to be successful in the restaurant industry, but you also got to know when to give a little bit too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where we set parameters for our staff now and for them to act within, and we try to coach them a certain way, but it also comes to our hiring process. What kind of people are we hiring and what do we care about? And then we have to walk it like we talk it. Mm-hmm. Like if they see me act a certain way or do a certain thing, then they're going to mimic that or think that that's okay. And so it's always extremely important to me to lead by example.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a good thing that if you don't have any experience in the industry, I do think it's a good thing to start at a big corporation because you learn a lot about structure and operations that will kind of set you up. It sets a standard for like operations, right? But then there's that soulfulness side of things that you really don't get too. What are your thoughts when I say that?
Well, I was going to use an analogy, which is it's like how I tell people they should learn to play acoustic guitar before electric. It's a lot harder on your fingers, but it'll make you a better player.
Yeah, I like that.
So
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought on what you were saying there, and it pulls too from my sports experience. Had really tough coaches.
Yeah. Were there any key coaches or mentors that you think really influenced the woman you are today?
Man, my business coach / therapist would probably tell you that the way I was coached was not the way most people should be coached. They were tough. But that motivated me, and I was a person that learns that way.
Give me an example of what tough was.
Example is, you never really got told good job until you did something just unbelievable, right? Because it was expected. And so I, to this day, have to make a conscious effort to point out the good that people are doing every day instead of saying, well, that could be better. Because, everybody's different. Everybody learns differently and is triggered different ways. And so I used to think I wanted to be a coach, and in some ways I am,
I was going to say.
Yeah, I became a coach in a totally different way than
sure.
what I expected, but I take a lot of those thoughts about, how you swing, and use that to coach our players now and how we act in the restaurants and in our hospitality group.
I love that. So when in your journey did you say, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, so I was going to college in Kansas for the first 2 years of college, and then I transferred to Oklahoma City University here in Oklahoma City and finished my college career there. National champions,
Nice.
senior year.
There you go.
So that was a good way to end it. And when I had moved here, I always got a job in the summer. Restaurants was always the easiest thing to do because there wasn't a lot of responsibility. You could kind of quit, whatever. And all the things we hate people for now. But I give them some slack just based on my own experience and how I was. I get it.
Yeah.
So anyway, but
Wait, before you go into that, I think there's
Sure.
a lesson there. You get it. And I think it's important that restaurant owners get it, because at the end of the day, and I don't want to put thoughts into your mind, but what do you mean by that? What do you get?
It's like I get what it's like to wash dishes. So when I build a dish pit, I really think about, are they part of the team? Is it comfortable in here?
Yeah.
Can they play their own music and me not hear it in the hallway? Like I've done those things. And so I take a lot of that into the way that we operate and build and think about our teams and stores in general. So
I love that. And to compound off of that, I think it's important to also know, to get that nobody's going to love your restaurant as much as you do. Nobody's going to treat it like you do. I mean, you can get some people to, but you have to understand that this isn't other people's, like their restaurant job is not their priority for a lot of people. And it's hard. Like, I think you need to accept that, because it's going to make the rest of your life a lot easier once. Because do you agree or disagree with that?
I totally agree.
Okay.
And it's funny that you bring that up. Earlier you asked me about my dad who works with us, and he joined our team about 2 or 3 years into the journey after Empire had opened, because he was living in Texas and moved back to the city and had never been in the restaurant industry before. But I needed help from someone that I could really trust.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of experience in contracting and procurement and inventory and things like that, and brought some maturity to our team, because we're a bunch of 30-year-olds running around not getting much respect, especially in the beginning, and not having a lot of experience in some of the business acumen side of things. So anyway, we built one of the restaurants, and I will never forget how mad he got after he saw the floors get scuffed up, like along the way or after a party that we'd had for someone or something. And he was just so infuriated, and it's taken like a while to kind of tone him down and just say like, hey, no one's ever going to care about that. We have to eliminate human error, right?
Yeah,
and we have to define our expectation
so
that we don't get so mad. And I kind of had like 2 columns about things in the restaurants that I'm always going to care about and things I'm going to try to let go.
Okay.
Because it can be overwhelming as the person who cares the most sometimes, when you feel like you're maybe frustrated that other people don't care as much as you. They never will. So what are you going to be okay with, letting slide or letting go? And then what are the things that you're going to let your team know, hey, just so you know, I'm always going to care about what music's playing in here, and I'm not going to apologize for that,
I made a note. I want to come back to the things you care about and the things you don't care about.
Sure.
But I want to stay chronological. So you were saying before I derailed us into this little rabbit hole that you got to understand, like, or you understood that, or you understand now that you can empathize with your employees, basically.
Totally.
So that was your train of thought. You're talking about how you got into the industry. So you came back to
Oklahoma City, right? And then I was living with a girl that was a drummer in my band at the time, and she actually was working at a new pizza restaurant in town, and she told me that they had an opening there because I was looking for a job. And so I went and applied, and like an idiot, I went at like 5 o'clock and no pen. And luckily, the lady that was the GM, who's still a really good friend of mine now, and I'd put on that mentor list, kind of early person who inspired me. She was really cool. She was like, I like your vibe and everything, but can you come back tomorrow between 2 and 4 and fill out an application, and I'll talk to you then? And I was like, I realized then the mistake I had made and what a jackass I probably looked like. But luckily, she had me back, and so I went in there, and I worked at that place for about a year and a half, and it was in a local restaurant group here. Anyway, that's where I really first got to see someone act in favor of the guest.
Okay.
And the way that she talked to the staff, and like pre-shift, and just really the way that they believed in their product, and how fresh everything was, coming from an on-the-border type place where there's a lot of prepackaged, frozen, whatever.
So this is after you graduate.
This is
back in
after,
Oklahoma City.
I was back in Oklahoma City, and this was probably, I think this started the summer after I graduated college.
What year is this?
This was probably
not to date you.
Spring 2008.
2008. Okay, so like 5 years before you open your own place.
Correct.
So you had 5 years of industry experience working in the industry for smaller, independent operators, a little more soulful. When did you? At what point were you like, maybe this is the path that I want to stay on? Like,
so I kind of climbed the ladder in that group, not on purpose.
in a year and a half?
No, it was probably like 3 years later. So I worked at the one store. They probably had 6 concepts at the time. I got pulled over to their fine dining restaurant for the holiday season, which I was terrified of.
I bet.
I knew nothing about wine.
It's intimidating.
They all wore, the long bistro apron, and they had a lot of staff there that was super experienced and older staff, and who just gave us hell all the time. And I still remember this in a pre-shift one time. One of the owners, who was very hands-on, said, "Hey, Rachel, come open this bottle of wine for us, or tell us about," tell us about the fish that's in the feature today. I knew nothing about that fish. And so I just kind of stumbled through it, and it was super embarrassing. Another thing about me is I hate being unprepared.
Oh, yeah.
I hate being embarrassed. It's like tripping while skipping in 3rd grade, trying to impress the 4th graders in the hallway. Never will leave my mind.
Oh, this is a story.
Yeah, it's a trigger. No, but I remember feeling so. And he was one of those people too that poked you, like one of those college.
And then he would twist.
Like some of my college coaches. You know, it's like they had really high expectations. He'd worked in Chicago, and so he had this, mentality. Yeah, so he thought. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But anyway, I took 2 copies of Food Lover's Companion, and I hid them in the restaurant. And I told myself, like, I would never feel stupid like that again. And so I just went out of my way all the time. I read Food Lover's Companion almost front to back, which is a really fun book to read. Have you ever seen it before?
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Man, it's a great book. It's got like little anecdotes that are like historical about food. It's almost like a dictionary for food.
Okay.
Has pictures, and then again, it'll have like a blip like this originated in Hungary.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, the 1700s.
You make me want to get it.
Yeah, it's a good book. So it's a lot of fun to mess around with. But I literally hid 2 copies kind of in nooks and crannies in the restaurant, so that once I heard the features or once I heard something, I would go, read it and figure it out. So
that's cool.
Anyway, I worked my way through there and ended up getting asked if I wanted to go manage at one of the restaurants that was failing, and with 2 of my other serving friends.
So at this point, I feel like you've been identified as somebody who gives an F, somebody who has a talent for the industry, a passion for the industry. Were you getting a lot of positive reinforcement? Were people acknowledging that your skill set, your talent?
I think most of it wasn't. I don't even know if it was talent. I was pretty decent I like people. Mm-hmm. And I always try to outwork everyone. And I have thick skin. So I think the combination of those things maybe like, you know, a light bulb went off for those guys, and they were like, maybe this is a person who will go over here and not be afraid of conflict or, you know, failure or things that are happening here.
Are you allowed to say the name of the restaurant group you
I'd
came
rather
up in?
not,
Okay.
but you know who you are.
Are there any mentors that you did have, any positive mentors or people that kind of helped grow you into the professional you are?
Oh, man. Well, I'm surrounded by some strong women. My mom's great. Had 3 kids, you know, before the age of 24.
Wow.
Later,
I feel like that was normal 30 years ago.
Yeah, it totally was.
We take our time now.
Yeah, I just turned 36 years old, and I have no interest in like any of that. I'm just the cool aunt to my brother's kids. I say I have 300 kids, and they're all assholes,
right.
so all teenagers, unruly teenagers. But anyway, so she put herself back through college later and kind of climbed the ladder and is now the CFO of a small airline company in Tulsa.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's
nice.
it's a fun story and looking back on her journey. And she's I look back too and I see she's a socialite, you know, like she's not a socialite in the traditional sense of like country club, whatever. That's definitely not her. But she's a great host. She loves hosting like dinner parties. She's a great cook and some stuff that maybe I didn't notice before.
What was like reflecting at your mom as a host? What are some of the things you think that she subconsciously taught you how to be a host?
Well, you know, my mom and I have had our ups and downs along the way, and she also in the beginning and a lot of my family and this is, well, people didn't really see a restaurant job as a career. I was supposed to go to law school.
Okay.
Took the LSAT, and that was like where I thought I was going to do.
I
and
was curious, what did you go to
very
college for?
respectable.
Did you mention? I don't think you mentioned. You mentioned sports, but you
poli-sci pre-law.
Okay.
And so I took the LSAT. My stepdad's an attorney. He gave me some pretty good advice because I just wasn't loving. Like, I think I wanted to go and say I got a law degree, and I wanted to learn that analytical style of thinking, solve problems.
Yeah.
But
figure it out.
Yeah, figure it out. But he gave me some pretty good advice, which was I can always go back and do that later. I had been very regimented my whole life up to that point, just being a college athlete and balancing school, and then really the level I was playing at even in my younger age in middle school and high school it was year round. I didn't go to spring break trips on a cruise in Mexico. I've to this day never been to Mexico.
Right.
So I missed out on a lot of those things, and he just said, do what you love, and you can always go back and do that later.
Okay, so back to like this point of your story, you said that you graduated 2007, 2008, 3 years working for this restaurant group. Now we're looking at 2011.
Right.
Only a year before you open at least going through the motions of opening your own place.
Yeah.
What was it that you loved? What was singing to you?
So I tell people even now that I started realizing that the restaurants really combined all the things I loved. People, art, music, booze, and food.
Yeah.
And not in that order. Booze was definitely the leader since March, but I've been on sober January so far, so it's going great. But anyway, so those were the things I loved. And then I just look back at the manager I was then too, and I cringe at some of the ways I was talking to people.
All
or
right,
managing
give us an
people.
example. Knowing what you know now, how have you evolved as a manager?
I used to think it was, well, how do I put this? So when we have new managers who've never managed before, I always try to like prepare them for the power that comes with it, because we always mismanage the power in the beginning, especially when you're young.
Give me an example.
So an example of something I did, that still just bothers me. I remember before we did a private event at the restaurant I was the GM at, that a kid showed up and just wasn't wearing the right clothes or had a beanie on or something. And I just remember basically calling him out in front of everyone, kind of being like shitty about it.
Yeah.
And everyone laughed, and that kid went home and changed. And I remember telling my mom actually later about it, thinking that she would think it was funny.
Yeah.
And she, like, stone cold was just like, is that how you're really going to treat people? And it really stuck with me the way she said that. And I take that with me forever. I mean, that was until like 2011.
Okay, so the year now is 2021.
Yeah, 10
Same
years
thing
ago.
happens.
Yeah.
What would you do? How would you approach that situation?
Oh, man. Well, one, I would have set the expectation before the event that, here's exactly what you need to be wearing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where you get it. Let me know if you don't have it.
And that this and anything other than this is unacceptable.
Right. And if we would have gotten to that situation, I would have pulled the person aside afterwards and helped them figure out a solution for it.
Yeah.
That's the difference between me now and me then, for sure.
I love that. So when are you like, okay, like I can do this whole restaurant thing. I got what it takes.
I still don't think I can.
Okay.
So,
I still don't think I can be a
imposter
podcast
syndrome.
host.
Yeah.
So, but you did take, like, what was the catalyst that triggered the series of events of you opening your first place?
So the restaurant group that I was working in, the restaurant I got kind of climbed the ladder to GM after some other people kind of fell off. They basically gave me the reins. The place was doing like $12,000 a week and needed to be doing like 25. They were in a hole, and they kind of just said, do whatever you want, just don't lose money.
Okay.
And so I got to try a bunch of stuff. I had access to P&Ls and things that a lot of people who are 27 years old have never seen.
I mean, what did they teach you? They must have taught you something during this time, because you went from there to owning your own place and being not even relatively successful.
Where I learned is when I left that group against my will, which actually ended up being for the best, I worked at a couple other local restaurant places as well. And I think once I got outside that group and saw a few others, I realized that I didn't want to operate like any of those people. And it's not to say that maybe I couldn't have found another group that did fit my mentality, but none of those, they weren't exciting.
Yeah.
They weren't organized. And there was a lot of just greed and weird stuff. They were all men. And it just rubbed me the wrong way. So then I saw this, while I was working at one of those places, I actually saw an ad or a Facebook something or other for a contest for an old laundromat space in the Plaza District.
Okay, which is where we're sitting today.
That's where we're sitting today, and that location is actually a few doors down the street. And I called a friend of mine who was, one of the only cool chefs I knew at the time, and because I don't cook, I can give you good feedback about your food and present like actual possible solutions for flavor or equipment or cooking kind of ideas.
Yeah.
But if you put me back there, like, I don't know how long you're supposed to roast a chicken or at what temperature. That's not my forte.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I called my friend, or actually I sent him a Facebook message, and it just said, call me, I'm going to change your life. Like very dramatic, And so he did, and he was getting out of working for a restaurant with his cousin, and so we put together this idea, and it was a European cafe. It was not pizza.
Okay.
And we pitched this idea, and we made it into the top 5, but they let us know, like, hey, you didn't win, sorry. And I don't lose well. I went to Austin a few weeks after that for the first time, and while I was waiting on my friend to get to town, I sat at the bar at Home Slice on South Congress. And as I was sitting there and kind of experiencing the magic of Austin, I thought it reminded me of maybe what the Plaza could be. And I just thought, why didn't we think of this? Like, why didn't we do pizza?
Before you get into that, I'm curious, because you started talking, you painted the picture of what you didn't want to be, right?
Oh yeah, you're bringing me back to the what changed.
Well, yeah, I mean, when did the switch flip? And you said you painted the picture of all the things you didn't like, but you wanted to be different, you wanted to be exciting, you wanted to be organized. But I mean, you were saying these places weren't that, so I'm assuming this is what you wanted to be. But really, if you can put yourself into that version of yourself, going back to 2012, 2011, what was your vision? What did you want to be?
I wanted to be a place I wanted to go to. I wanted to be a place I wanted to hang out at, that my friends wanted to hang out at, that I was proud of. And I think, that's really where a lot of the places I was working were falling short for me.
Why weren't you proud of them? I mean, all the reasons you listed before, I'm assuming.
A lot of places I worked at, they didn't care. Not as much as I cared, and I was just a bartender or a manager.
You as the manager should not care the most.
Right. It's like what you said earlier. As the owner, no one should care about this restaurant more than me, right?
Yeah.
And I was working at places where I felt that they didn't. It really bothered me, where they were closed-minded about what the future might look like, stale. And I had, at that point, I had just recently started traveling some for the first time really in my life, and seeing Chicago and seeing Austin and seeing Los Angeles, and going, why don't we have this?
Yeah.
And it made me mad because we get this reputation as being this honky, fast food capital.
For the record, and no offense, when I told people I was coming to Oklahoma City, they're like, why.
Right.
I was like, I don't know.
I'm working on breaking that.
It looks like there's some cool stuff that happened, and you were that cool stuff.
I mean, I appreciate you saying that. We still have a lot of work to do, but this was an oil and gas, place for a long time, and it's finally just now starting to diversify, but it has so much potential. And when I go out of town, I'm the biggest recruiter for Oklahoma City. I'm trying to steal chefs. I'm trying to steal. I'm trying to encourage them. Well, right. Well, like what you said earlier about how you were living in Austin, and then now you've, had to move back home. A lot of people are doing that. We have several people working for us right now who are living in Brooklyn, working at cool places that I read about, who are now here managing at our Asian American fried chicken shop.
I think that is just a little glimpse, a hint of what's to come in the future.
Yeah.
I think that these big cities, the time that we came from, where everyone flocking to the New Yorks, the Los Angeleses, the Chicagos of the world is, people are still going to go to those cities, but there's not a need to be in those cities anymore. That's not where the opportunity is. You can find opportunity there, but you can find opportunity anywhere today with the advent of the internet, and people can stretch their dollars so much further getting out of the cities. Not to mention, I think we're starting to realize a lot about human nature and the human psyche, and we're happier out of the cities when we're not on top of each other. And I think we're starting to realize this, So I think the future is in markets like Oklahoma City. If you want to be ahead of the curve, like get out and go to where you can take these lessons from the big cities and be the best,
Sure.
I don't want to put words into your mouth.
There's so much we can do here. There's so much that hasn't been done, and the cost
Exactly.
of doing it is like 1/4
Yes.
of what you would be spending
Margins
in
way
Houston or
big,
somewhere else. And then you read a lot of stories right now about people in Manhattan or their commute times, and just how much of their life was spent driving to work or waiting for an elevator to get to the 90th floor or whatever.
We're only hardwired to be able to know and really engage with about 150 people. When you live in the city, you just don't everything's a transaction, because you just can't. The average person just can't handle that much.
Yeah.
We're back, and during the break, you just realized that you wanted to talk more about mentors that influenced you, and I cut you short. So pick up that train of thought.
Well, I kind of just jump around a lot, so don't feel like you cut me short. But yeah, so really, my parents, both of them, my dad, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, works with me as well, and he was, even though I grew up living in Tulsa, and he was in Ada, which is about an hour and a half from here, and once my parents got divorced, I was, we were seeing him every other weekend, but he had 3 kids, again, who were under the age of 6, and he was not yet 30, and dealing with that is a tough situation for a lot of people, and he could have been not present, but he made such a point to be a great dad that no matter where my softball games were or whatever, he was the guy driving 3 hours and back in one night so he could make it to work the next day. And then, so his competitiveness, we laugh a lot about it now because we're both we get a little bit hot-headed on certain items, and it's funny because now I feel like I'm the one talking him down sometimes now, but I literally broke my wrist in college in a scrimmage, getting mad about striking out, and punched a bench or something. And so it's funny because now working together, I see some of that in him that he always said, hey, don't do that, and I'm like, hey man, you're doing it right now.
Now you're the boss.
Yeah, but he was always such a oh gosh, what's the word? He was always so solid. He's always so consistent. He's a person of his word, and that means a lot to me. That whatever
integrity.
the old integrity. That saying about there's been a couple times where we got kind of sideswiped by something or someone, and I got mad and wanted to do something about it, and he just said, "That's not who we are," and I really appreciate that side of it. And
core values, man.
Core values. Yeah. It's extremely important to me. And a lot of that, not that it doesn't come from my mom also, but he brings a different side of it for me. And then, so.
I love it. So we were just at the point where you identified all the things you didn't want to be. You knew what you wanted to be. You had a vision for what you wanted to be. And now you're going after it. There was this competition for a space. Was it like a pop-up? What was going on? Was it a competition to actually take over the space?
It was literally an old laundromat that still had baskets of clothes in it. I'll have to show you a photo later because it's
please,
just
I'd love
got
that.
pigeon.
We can show that during the video. We can actually B-roll that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So the space was a citywide contest, and could have been anything. It wasn't necessarily for a restaurant. And I can't remember. It was called Crowd something. It's not a website that still exists anymore.
Crowdsource?
No. I'll try to think of it. But I tried to look it up a few years ago because I was doing a contest for a space in a building that I owned, and I wanted to use the same platform, and it didn't exist anymore. Okay. So it's gone. But it was pretty cool. People could basically submit their ideas, and it could be there are people who are like, I want to do an arcade laundromat or a flower shop or a restaurant or whatever. There were all kinds of ideas in like a forum where people were discussing what they thought should go there. So anyway, after I went to Austin and I came back, I told my friend Avery, the chef, I just said, man, let's just keep working on an idea. We're going to find a different space and we'll just make it happen somewhere else. We got a call maybe like a week and a half after that from the landlords for the laundromat space who said, hey, we couldn't come to terms on a lease with the person that won. Yeah. We really like you guys, but do you have any other ideas? Because that one was just, not that great. And I basically...
now you're back off the trip from Austin.
I'm back off the trip from Austin, and so I'm looking at Avery and just like, just go with it. And I just said pizza, but we didn't know how to make pizza. And so that became a whole nother fun trip after that, the whole figure it out mentality.
Yeah, I love that though.
Yeah.
So awesome. When figuring it out, like what approach were you taking? Were you approaching other people who had pizzerias? Like, were they in your market? Were they kind of weird about giving you advice? Like what approach did you take?
It was really hard. Well, I had a little bit of experience because of the pizza place that I worked at when I moved to Oklahoma City, but they were a wood-fired pizza restaurant. And I wasn't really paying that much attention to the kitchen. So, I mean, I knew about our product, but I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know the how or why sometimes,
Yeah.
So, honestly, what I did was I saw that we did a couple tastings, and they didn't go so well. Like, the apps and salads and stuff were all great, but the pizza, the star of the show, was not good.
No, it takes time to figure out pizza, the dough, using like how temperature and humidity and all that plays into it.
Yeah.
And then you have to stay consistent. And I mean, it's not like an overnight type of thing.
No, we still play with it every day now.
I'm sure.
So I find this school in San Francisco online called Tony Gimignani's International School of Pizza.
Tony.
And so I register for the American New York style class, and I go. And again, I'm not a chef, but
how much was this class?
It seemed expensive at the time. In hindsight, like, obviously it's paid off, so that's cool. But I think it was like $5,000.
Yeah, but I mean, that's knowledge. Like, what can you take that? What can
especially
you do with that?
From that guy.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I didn't even know really what I was walking into. I mean, I'd seen like 1,000 videos of him throwing dough in those competitions. But talk about a master of their craft. And a person who was a mentor for me, too, and has kind of stayed in touch over the years a little bit, or when we see each other at the Pizza Expo or
and Mike
whatever.
Bosch just had a lot of great things to say about him from Andolini's.
Yeah.
Not Andolini's. I keep on saying Andolini's. It's because there's a place back in New Hampshire.
Andolini's.
He's gonna kill me.
That's okay. You corrected it. So Andolini's.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went to that class. I was the only female, as usual, it felt like in restaurant stuff. But I was in there. There was a guy literally from China who was there. There was a dude from France. There was a guy from Toronto that ended up actually opening, or Vancouver, who opened his own pizza place. I don't know if it's still open now, but he was cool. And then there were two guys who worked for a grocery store chain that's in California that I can't remember what it was called, and they were going to start doing pizzas in the grocery stores, and so they had been sent to this class too.
Okay.
And I kind of was the outlier. I didn't really hang out with all the guys in the class. They were a little bit older than me too, but I would just walk across the street during the breaks for the class and actually I think I walked to the bar down the street and skipped lunch and had like a shot of Powers at this Irish bar down the street and, a harp or something, and then would come back to class feeling real good.
Loose.
Yeah, but it was really fun. I love a new challenge, but also I hate not being good at things.
Yeah.
And so it's very frustrating for me. And a quick story is like we were pushing dough, which is where you take the dough ball out and then you put it on a floured surface, and then you're pushing it into the shape of a pizza. You're shaping the dough.
Gotcha.
Well, I had heard Tony tell his assistant that the dough was a little cold, like they hadn't sat it out to get to room temp. And so I couldn't really get my dough to stretch very well. And so I was kind of making excuses for it. And so he came over there and he's like, oh, what dough is cold? This dough? And he picked it up and he did like 10 tricks and had it in a perfect pizza shape in about 5 seconds.
Like,
And he looked at me and laughed. And he kept calling me gorilla hands the whole time because I was just like very heavy on my dough pushing.
That's funny.
But anyway, so it was pretty funny. But he kind of took me under his wing. We had a lot of good laughs, and I really got to understand the why and how of dough making. It was it was super interesting, scientific. We had like a 30-page workbook, and there were formulas and this and that. And that restaurant in San Francisco actually has about 6 different styles of ovens. And so electric and the Rotoflex, which is what
So
Mike
you can learn
uses.
all of them, yeah.
Yeah, you got to kind of see everything, and he used certain ovens for certain styles of pizza. We got to see some of the different
How
styles
long
of
was this
pizza.
course?
This was a week.
Wow.
It was a
crash
lot.
course. That's a lot. That's like drinking from a fire hose. That's a lot of information.
It was. Yeah. It was definitely a lot. And so as soon as I came back, I told Avery, I was like, I need to tell you everything right now before I forget it all.
Yeah, I'm surprised the chef didn't come with you, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it was so expensive. We didn't have any money.
Yeah, it makes sense. I feel that. So, okay, well, I mean, I think it just goes back to what you were saying earlier, is that everything's figure-outable. If you don't know the answer, don't let that stop you. Go figure it out. Go to somebody who does. Even if that means paying $5,000, how bad do you want it? Invest in yourself, right?
Yep.
You mentioned pizza. I think it's important to note that in my research, you said that you give the market what it's missing, right?
Right.
So was there no pizza in this market, like in this part of Oklahoma City?
There was a lot of pizza, and everybody warned me, but I just didn't feel like anyone was doing what I wanted to do. There was no pizza by the slice, really.
Okay, that's where I was going.
There was one place that's still operational now, but the way that they do their pizza is they cook off all cheese pies, and then you pick your toppings, and then they
put it back in the oven.
Yeah.
No
And that's
offense.
what I was advised to do by a person, it was like...
Well, I mean, like operationally, yeah,
It makes
that's the
sense.
most streamlined, but
Right.
is quality over, like...
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, so I think there's an important lesson to be gleaned here that just because somebody's doing something doesn't mean you can't do it too, but how can you do it differently? What's your unique selling proposition? Pizza by the slice. And you put the focus on the slice, which makes it... I mean, that touches on a whole different demographic, too, like somebody with a smaller budget, maybe,
Yeah. And also the other thing that was lacking in Oklahoma City was there was no late night dining. And I can make a reservation to eat my second dinner in Chicago at 11 p.m. or New York. Why do I have to go to a bar to be social? Why when I get off work at my restaurant job, do I have to eat fast food? Or go to like the one pancake diner that's real shitty on the opposite side of town to get a meal where I could actually sit down and chill before I go home.
Yeah.
We didn't have that. And so we really built it for our industry friends too. And from the beginning, we stayed open until 2 o'clock. I remember one time we closed early, and this is a lesson for people, and I've never done it since then, is the consistency of your hours of operation. I mean, we were slow that first year from midnight to 2. It was not busy. And the Plaza District was a little sketchy still.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you know about this area,
Not much.
but it was rough. It was pretty rough then. We had a pretty large homeless population, some pretty aggressive people who would frequent the neighborhood, panhandling. We still deal with a little bit of the panhandling stuff now, especially in the holidays, but it's gotten so much better.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of empty spaces still. So it was just a lot different. But anyway, I closed early that one night, and I remember someone sending me like a scathing email the next day about how they brought these people from out of town and all this shit.
No.
And it really like set something in stone that I already knew, which was you gotta walk it like you talk it.
Yeah,
I
think
gotta
it goes,
do what I say.
It goes back to integrity.
Yeah.
If it on paper or on the internet says you're open at this time,
Yeah.
you got to follow through with what you say.
Most definitely. So anyway,
great lessons there. You mentioned that you didn't have any money.
yeah.
So talk to us about how you actually, so I'm assuming they liked the pizza idea, right?
Right.
So what was it about, you pitched it, what was it that made this, or made you able to execute this? How did you pull it all together?
So I had a little bit of experience. I had seen some business plans before. And this is something I tell people now if they ever ask me for advice about an idea they want to try, is that numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
And you really got to start with that is, what's your average price per person? Well, first, like, what's your set prices for your menu, and you got to know about menu cost of goods and
Were
things
you
like
costing
that.
your menu at this? Did you do like a costing card for your items at
Shit,
this point?
I don't think we had gotten that far
Okay.
yet.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I was estimating
Okay.
based on what I thought it could sell for, looking at some places in the area, similar size pies, how many people could one pie feed, stuff like that. And then trying to make the cost work
Reverse
for
engineering.
it. I did kind of
yeah,
reverse
yeah.
engineer it, yeah. And I had been a bar manager before, and so that part was easy for
Yeah.
me, is knowing like what that cost of goods should be and what that should look like. But we also did something unique there, which is that we did all canned beers. Like,
Okay.
we've never had one bottle of beer since 2013. We had the largest canned beer selection. That's only cans in Oklahoma.
What was the point for that?
I wanted to recycle all the cans.
Okay.
And also, man, I used to have like a whole spiel about this, but canned beer is cool now. Like,
Yeah.
everybody does it.
Yeah.
It's easier. It's better for the environment.
Yeah.
Gets colder faster,
Mm-hmm.
stays fresher. Light doesn't penetrate the glass. Like, I could give you a spiel on some of those, but
Okay.
I love canned beer. It's awesome. So.
Awesome. So, you win the space.
Right.
You're able to convince these people. You're leasing or renting.
Yep, rented.
What about the initial? Like, how'd you get the capital for the initial
Sure.
build out and all that?
So one of my family members gave me, like, basically took their money out of a stock market situation. It's like 10 grand.
Okay.
That's all the money we got. I want everyone to hear me when I say that, because
That's
sometimes
crazy.
people think that we just had it. We didn't have it.
Yeah. But you were able to execute. So, like, how did you like duct tape this restaurant?
Yeah,
together at 10
so
grand?
the restaurant space that we won, a lot of the build out was handled by the landlord.
Okay.
And so that was great. But there's a caveat to that, which is that in that situation, and this goes back to setting yourself up for success and really reading operating agreements and leases, there was a 5% of gross sales, like percentage rent.
Okay.
And there was no, like, ceiling. It wasn't like anything over $2 million a year.
So was it fixed and 5%?
Yeah, so we had a base rent
Okay.
of like $3 grand, which was
Okay.
super manageable.
Yeah.
I felt like, but by the end of when we left there, we were paying $16,000 a month with no cap, and
Damn.
yeah, it was really rough. And they weren't willing to negotiate with us. So
How long were you at that location?
2013 to mid 2018.
Okay, wow, 5 years. But I mean, I think there's something to be said about that, because at the same time, like, would you have been able to do it without that? Like, are you willing to give something up now for
Right.
for a future investment? And like, maybe if you had known about it, you would have like worked out like, okay, 5% for the first 2 years.
I would have capped it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And but that's the thing,
Live
you
and
learn the
learn.
hard way. Exactly. But now if
Absolutely.
you're listening to this podcast, you
Yeah.
know to think about that.
Sure.
But he did give you the means to.
They gave us some of it,
Yeah, the
and then
opportunity.
Avery, my chef partner there, who's still partnered with us now in several stores, he had 2 people that really believed in him, and they brought the only other cash that we had. And so, anyway, that's how we ended up with the capital to build the restaurant. And let's get serious. If you saw the restaurant and what it looked like, I mean,
Which restaurant is it now?
so it's Mexican Radio now down the
Okay,
street.
okay.
It's just a couple doors down.
I was walking around. I was trying to figure out which restaurant it was earlier.
Yeah, like the band, 3 doors down. Bad joke, but it is right down there. And so it was like 1,700 square feet.
I was going to ask how many seats.
It's been a minute, but probably like,
Approximately.
I would say max, and we really maxed it out. It maybe had like 80.
Okay.
But there was a side area there that was a gravel lot, and we ended up throughout the years covering it and gained like double the seats out there. We built this big deck out back. We used to have these big parties and a beer garden, and like we really maximized the space that we had. But it was maxed out, and we only had 2 deck ovens. That was the only cooking equipment we had. We were making dough in a 60-quart Hobart mixer in a closet that was like 3 feet deep by 6 feet wide, and we
I
did it
love
at
it, though.
3 o'clock in the morning for 5 years.
Oh my goodness, man. I love that.
Yeah.
So reflecting back at that time, what you did well, what you did wrong, you were kind of tapped on the cap and the rent and stuff like that. Anything else coming to mind that you wish you knew then that you know now?
Well, just the way that we designed the restaurant in general was kind of a pain. You're sitting in it now, you can see that we've got the kitchen in the back half of the restaurant, and we have the bar in the front. But in the original space, we actually had the kitchen in the front because we wanted people to be able to see the guys throwing pies and stuff from outside. And then we had the bar in the back. But I mean, it worked for what it was, but it was just not set up for success. Anytime the kitchen needed something, they had to go like a mile to go get it.
Yeah.
We only had the 2 deck ovens, which now all of our places have 4, and I swear sometimes we need 6, it feels like. But, yeah, just the way that it was built. But, you know, we did what we had to do, and we did it the best way we knew how. And so
and that's all
there
you
was that
can
part of
do.
it.
Just go. Don't let what you don't know stop you.
Yeah.
Because you can always change. You can always evolve. You can always figure it out as you go, right?
Sure. And we didn't. Oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
No, you're
that time.
fine. You're fine.
I was just going to say that we also had no debt when we started because we used all cash, which I was really kind of I was always like taught to be afraid of credit cards. I feel like when I was younger, probably because I misused them a time or two in college. But that's leveraging what you have, like once you've grown, I think is a smarter way of doing this, because instead of just blowing all the cash that you have.
Yeah.
So
start as minimally. I cut you short this time.
That's okay.
Say it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and we take that mentality. It depends on what kind of store we're building.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
So there's something else that I pulled from your story, which I thought was really great. How the whole story behind Goro and how that started.
Yeah.
I think gold. The approach you guys took here. Get into that.
So, well, it depends which Goro you're talking about, because I'll just start from the beginning. In 2000, so my sister had a good friend when she was in college named Jeff Chanchaloon. He had worked at a cool sushi place in town, and he would always bring her this ginger dressing that we loved. And anyway, so I kind of got to know him a little bit through that. And then he was in school at University of Oklahoma, marketing, graphic design, advertising guy. Gets out and decides he doesn't want to do that or isn't loving doing it. And this is when the food truck craze started. So he builds this food truck with a friend, and I'll think of the name of it here in a second. Kaiteki.
Okay.
Took me a second. Anyway, so he builds this food truck with his friend, and I needed a logo for something, and so I emailed him, and I was like, hey, Jeff, how's it going? Congrats on the truck. It was like on Eater, like coolest food trucks in America right now or something. And Eater, you know, especially then was so cool.
Yeah.
And so I reached out, and I just I'm always a poker, like, especially when I see talented people or things I'm interested in or curious about. I'm like, how's the food truck going? And how are you? And he just kind of started telling me food truck life is hard. It is. And I've done it, and it is hard. And I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
I mean, in some cities that are really walkable, like Austin, great food truck scene, right? Mm-hmm. Certain areas that might work, a food truck park might work, but like if you're just driving one around a city as large as Oklahoma City with no home base and no restaurant behind it, it's not my
everything has its pros and cons, right? And people always look at the pro of a food truck as the lower overhead capital to start.
Yeah.
But the logistics are a nightmare.
Load it, unload it, load it, unload it.
We've talked to a lot of restaurateurs that started with food trucks, and trust me, we've gotten all the warnings.
Yeah.
But what I'm pulling from your story up to this point when coming across Jeff is your interest and curiosity about other people. And
Always.
when you see talent, don't be afraid to engage with that talent. Don't be afraid to poke that talent. Don't be afraid to let that talent know that you see that they're talented. And don't look at them as competition. See what their strengths are, and give them an opportunity to leverage their strengths, and collaborate.
Well, not to compare myself to Nick, but he literally met Grant by eating his food at the restaurant Grant was cooking at, and that's when he gave him an opportunity to build their own.
We're talking about Grant
Ackett's and Nick Cacones.
Yeah. Awesome. They past guests on the show. Amazing people.
I just love it, and as far as mentors like here for restaurants are concerned, it's not. I don't want to. There are definitely some great restaurant people in here who've been around for a long time and are strong restaurant operators. But as far as people who were really getting outside the box, I wasn't seeing a lot of that. And so when you talk about mentors, I was reading about these people.
Do you know Nick?
No, never met him.
I would love
before.
to introduce you.
Oh, man, that'd be like, whew, I feel like I was meeting Garth Brooks or something.
The least I can do, you're sitting here in front of me.
Hey, I really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
No, I've just, in watching what he do with Talk and kind of how that works, and just not only restaurants, but things that help restaurants, and watching what they've been able to do with Alinea during COVID and Next. And
Talk.
And I don't know how Aviary's doing. Yeah, Talk's just so incredible. We've had a lot of our own thoughts about stuff like that over this period of time, but I'm going off on a tangent.
It's a lot.
Anyway, recruiting though is a part of coaching, and so when you talk about identifying talent, and I'm not poaching, I'm just opening the door.
Yes, I was gonna say you're creating an opportunity.
Sure.
Like if somebody's earned it, like why not give them the offer?
If somebody left me to go work somewhere else, of course there's that dagger for a second, that you're angry or you're defensive.
But it's not about you.
Well, there's that. Sometimes it's for opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to look at yourself and go, what was I not able to provide this person that made them want to leave?
Yeah, and I want to get into that because
Sure.
I did a little research and I saw that there was a lot that you recognize people were leaving and you want to change that. And you did a lot of great things to retain people. But back to the...
Jeff.
What's that?
Jeff.
Yes, exactly. And I have his name written down right in front of us.
Got it.
So with Goro.
Yeah.
Wait, did I say that right?
Well, yeah, Goro,
Yeah,
you said it
sorry.
right.
All these restaurants run through my head all the time, so it's hard to keep them all straight.
I totally understand.
So I love that you started with a pop-up,
Yeah.
a once a month. And what was going through your mind? Why did you take that approach?
Well, we were both doing other things at the time, and I wasn't sure how we were going to work together. I knew him as a friend, but I wasn't sure about his work ethic. I'd eaten his food. I knew that it was good, but I didn't know how good.
You're dating at this point, right?
Yeah,
More or
totally.
less,
And not knowing what the future held. We
Yeah.
just wanted to do something cool. Like, I get bored very easily.
That wasn't literal, by the way. You guys weren't actually dating. But
No,
what I meant by
his
that
wife's
is,
name is also Rachel, though, and so we always laugh because there's been people along the way. They're like, "Yeah, your husband Jeff,"
You're the work
and
Rachel.
Jeff and I just die laughing because if you knew us at all, you know that we would never date or be married. But yeah, so anyway, but yeah, the pop-ups were the new cool thing. They were the hidden dinners and the emails, and so that's kind of what we did. We created Project Slurp. Found a space, a really cool intellectual property law firm here in town that handles all of our work now for us. But they had a really cool space. They let us use it for free. But we did these ticketed ramen dinners where ramen was the star of the show. He would do different types of ramen each time. And he did it was like a 5-course dinner. And I would pair 5 cocktails. And so word got out pretty quickly that you got real wasted. We had to start doing like a disclaimer sort of at the beginning, which is like, give me your keys. Yeah. Or because I couldn't, and I learned a lot throughout that process about, how to make some of the drinks smaller, but I was just making full-size cocktails because I wanted people to see the value in their money.
Yeah, but what are the benefits of what you're doing right now?
Oh, man. So when we were doing the pop-up, though, I got to test music.
Yep.
I got to test staff.
Yep.
I got to test drink ideas, what do people like, not like, timing, mostly my working relationship with Jeff.
Yes.
And so I recommend, to a lot of people if they can, and I know it's not always possible, but you've really got to know who you're getting in bed with, right? And even from a business standpoint, same thing.
Yeah,
so.
and if I can stack on top of that, you're also creating buzz,
Right.
with a very minimal overhead. And you're creating relationships, not just with your business partners, but with all the people who love ramen in the city. And that's like, if you can collect that data early on, if you can start an email list, like when they sign up, when they buy a ticket, you can get their email.
Totally.
Hey, guess what? We found a location. Like now it's all about relationships, and you can start building those relationships now by hosting a once a month pop-up, you know, and like you pointed out, and I have to put emphasis on it, your data research or market research, right? And you're tweaking your recipes and learning about what works best,
Right.
It's so powerful.
Well, and even at that time, like there was only one ramen shop in Oklahoma. One, and it was in Oklahoma City. It still is, and they do a different style of ramen than we do. But when you talk about that unique part, and when you talk about bringing the other parts of what we love into it, it's a place I want to hang out at. It's forward thinking. It's late night dining, which we just didn't have. And so we heard about a space that was for rent before anyone else knew about it. It was in the Plaza District, which we'd already had success with Empire. And so this was in late 2015, early 2016. Empire was about 2 years old at that time. And it was a perfect space for a little ramen shop. And that little ramen shop became like the ramen shop that could. It was 1,600 square feet. The patio was rarely ever used because...
That was in the Plaza District too,
yeah,
right?
it's on the opposite end of the street, and now has become our hybrid service Asian American fried chicken shop. Japanese style wings.
Gotcha. I'm headed there next.
Yeah, awesome. So but that was Goro, and Goro was there until COVID, and then we pulled some we had to make some really crazy decisions. Like, that place was super successful from a financial standpoint. Everyone knew where it was. I never would have moved it, but we had to come up with a creative solution to save ourselves in the other restaurant that we had in the Paseo district that was no longer going to work anymore.
Okay, I think that's worth shelving until we get to the COVID stuff, and I do want to pull a lot more out of you.
There's a lot there.
There's gold that you're dropping on us right now. Thank you for getting into those details of the pop-up. I think it's really important, and we could talk about every opening and how you learn different things from everything, but I think what you do really well, which is worth making an example of you for, is the pivot you made with your perspective on how you treat employees and how you started changing the culture. Take us through that cultural evolution and how you started redirecting your focus.
Well, I don't really know. I guess it would be in 2016 is when we created the hospitality group. So let's start with that.
Okay.
And the reason that we created 84 Hospitality Group, 84 is the year I was born. I got tired of trying to be clever. So when I created that, it was really to create an umbrella to tie together all the restaurants, right? And so that we could share resources, so that we could have a director of operations and have an in-house accountant. We didn't have any of that until I was that person for a long time. But when we started that, it kind of grew from there. And it was when we started getting to like our fourth restaurant, which opened in 2017, and we were getting north of like 150 employees. And I wasn't able to know everyone's names anymore, and I wasn't able to directly affect those people and make sure they were happy.
Yeah.
That I think we started looking at ways we could create possibilities for, to take care of them, to educate them, and to help them in their personal lives and personal growth, so that they'd stick around, right? Because retention, especially...
And that's what I read, is that you started noticing a higher turnover.
Yeah, and a lot of restaurants had just extremely high turnover. There's no loyalty. Unless you're a manager, right? At least then there's a reason to come back. But most of these kids, they don't have a paycheck to come pick up. They don't have any reason to stay. And every time you turn around, they could literally go to and apply at 6 other restaurants and get hired at any one of them the next day. And so that posed a very interesting problem for our industry that, I still haven't figured out. And obviously everything's changed now with COVID. But in that moment, I started asking a lot of questions about what does the staff need or care about that they don't have. And I started thinking about myself a lot. I started thinking about, I remember, restaurant people have this, stigma for being kind of wild. We stay up late, we drink, we smoke, we party, we whatever, and we don't take care of ourselves very well. A lot of restaurant people don't have insurance. A lot of us don't manage well, especially when we're first starting out. You're cash heavy, tips. You don't manage your money very well, whether it's because you don't know how, or you don't even know how much money you had in your apron that day. You don't deposit it into the bank or whatever. So there was just a lot of stuff that started coming up, and we started trying to create ways to help educate the people who work for us and provide opportunities for them to have discounted gym memberships or whatever, and trying to work with some places in town. We went as far as trying to create an app and then realized how expensive apps are, and at that time it wasn't really the best move for us financially, but that's not out of the picture. We just recently switched payroll companies who have an HR platform that is really helpful for the staff, because we don't have an in-house HR person, because to be completely honest, we can't really afford one, and so we handle a lot of that ourselves. But this provides a lot of information that they would need for that. And there's just a lot of stuff that's outside of us that we point them to or have discounts to, or especially when COVID hit, just giving them a list of 3 therapists who would do 10 sessions for free. We're trying to take care of our team and our family. And really during COVID, that became even harder, but so important.
Yeah. And you started this discussion on this vertical of how you started treating your employees differently, saying that nobody has loyalty to you, unless you're loyal to them.
Right.
And you have to give before you expect to get loyalty. You have to give loyalty, and you give loyalty by taking care of people and their most basic needs. Like, just listening to the things that you're doing, you're offering security, and you're leaning to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs of, not just giving them a paycheck and giving them security in that way, but also giving them security and teaching them how to create security for themselves, and giving them, people also want to grow and be healthy and take care of themselves. You're giving them access to healthcare, or like you mentioned health benefits, but also the gym, yoga classes. But I don't think what you're doing is the difference between a transaction and being a transformative mentor and giving people life skills that they're going to remember forever. And you're transforming people, and I think that's the way to look at it. And
I didn't really think of it like that.
Well,
I was just doing it, because I was trying to take care of them. But to hear you say it like that, and that's like my business coach, she says, how do you grade yourself? But that's that hard coach coming out that's always like, not good at more, do better, do more. And so that's interesting to hear you say that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what changed? What did retention change?
Yeah, so we were really getting into measuring a lot of that before COVID.
Yeah.
And I was so excited about it. We had we call them sprints, where every quarter our hospitality group directors were given a sprint that they were working on, whether it was an employee wellness plan. We were working on free English classes for our Spanish-speaking staff who maybe didn't feel comfortable going somewhere and trying to take, or paying for English, because we find communication to be sort of a problem for us sometimes, and it hinders their growth as well whenever they're not able to speak, English. So
the business language.
Yeah, totally. And so anyway, we were working on a lot of things like that. Retention was my sprint. I was really interested in seeing how those numbers turned out. But first we had to even just start making sure that we were coding it correctly when we lost someone.
Yeah.
Why did they leave? And that's hard to do too, because most places have an exit interview.
Right.
Good luck getting one here. You
don't get one?
No, I mean, a lot of the time, if a person just doesn't show up again, they're not going to answer my call.
Right.
We try,
Yeah.
but they have no reason to, especially younger people, the loyalty part. And so I kind of had to just make a category for that and be like, other or whatever. So anyway, when COVID hit, though, you mentioned we were giving people security. We're trying to give people security in the most insecure time for our industry and just for working people in general, right now. And there were some really hard times where I beat myself up a lot during this because I wasn't communicating with them enough, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to scare them, or I didn't know the exact answer to help them, or I was working on something and there was a lot of confusion about PPP loans, and you guys got PPP loans, and why aren't you paying us? And we are paying you, but I'm not sure what you're asking me, and tell me how you think those work, so I can discuss it with you instead of just like roasting me on social media or something. Right. It was a hard time. I learned a lot during that, but I'm really proud to say, I mean, in all the stores that we have, I think we had 7 or 8 stores before COVID, and we've lost 2 managers. One because he wanted to move to Las Vegas and be a blackjack dealer, or Barcelona. He wasn't sure. A little bit of a difference there. And then another one because she was a part-time manager and wanted to go do real estate. But I'm really proud that we were able to retain all of our management and just the road we've been down. So anyway, a little bit of a tangent there, but it's extremely important to me to get back to taking care of people. We were able to extend health benefits to some people who didn't have them before in the middle of COVID, and I just to hear some of them say, I'm getting an inhaler for like $20 for the first time, and it makes working so much easier, or just doing tasks like carrying groceries up the stairs, it like kind of broke my heart a little bit,
Yeah.
But there's a business aspect to it too. I can't give full health benefits to 400 people for free, and that's an industry problem. That is a government problem, man. You know what? Well, I'd love to talk about that with some people and try to get that figured out, but it is hard. I read somewhere the other day, everybody said, if you want that to be fixed, you have to realize that you've been underpaying for food and service forever.
But whose fault is that?
It's a good question.
I think it's our fault.
I mean, I don't disagree.
But I think it's generations of competing against each other, not working with each other, undercutting each other, to the point where the food suffers, the quality of life suffers, because we just want to have the lowest prices for perceived value.
If we all played the same game the same way, it would change.
But we need to teach people how to play the game, and then it becomes about who does the game best.
Or you have to make them, and as you can see in the world that we live in right now, nobody wants to be made to do anything. And so, anyway.
But I think also a big part of it comes to educating the general public that, hey, if you want food done right, it comes at a cost, and that your perception of food has been bastardized over the past 30 years because that's our fault. But here's the thing, food done right, organically, sustainably, locally, takes money, and we need to charge what it's worth. And I think that's the other variable.
So let me turn this around a little bit too and say it's really interesting. Outside of the restaurant industry, people who aren't actually working in it, they go, why don't these kids have insurance, and why don't they have whatever? Now, there's some real benefits for people who work in the restaurant industry, as I mentioned earlier about why I even started doing it in college. Flexibility, cash when you need it. I could work 4 doubles and make my rent. Just no responsibility. A lot of those, I might have already said that, a lot of those things that were pluses. And I'll tell you, we interviewed a lot of staff through COVID, and we went down a rabbit hole trying to create this like hourly rate, a guaranteed wages system where if you didn't hit this number, that we would pay you the difference if you worked a certain number of hours. Like I created this whole like crazy, I thought about to revolutionize the restaurant industry, and everybody was going to love it. And when I presented 3 options to one of our restaurants, if you know which one, I let them vote, and they picked to keep their own tips.
I was going to say it had to be to keep their own tips.
It was, and it really like blew my mind. And it showed me that the people who work in this industry, some of them, not all of them, and I'm not saying it needs or has to be this way forever, they like how it is. So keep that in mind too when we're talking about it.
Yeah, you got to take that in consideration for sure. Man, we could really unpackage this. But there's one thing that I think that I'm really curious about, just personally. Maybe this is more me being selfish. Paint the big picture of what 84 Hospitality is today, as far as the amount of locations you have and what you've scaled to.
I had to write them down because it sounds silly, but sometimes I get confused about what's where. We moved a lot of stuff and done a lot of things. So let's see, we have 2 full-service Empire Slice House locations. There's one in Tulsa that was open for 5 days before COVID hit, so that was our first foray outside of Oklahoma City, and was supposed to be like a home run off the bat. Its location's killer, overhead's great, like everything, and then anyway, we're adapting. So we have 2 full-service Empires. We have a counter-service Empire that's called Empire Slice Shop.
Gotcha.
And so we have that. We have a Mexican restaurant called Revolucion, and it in that restaurant we're also executing our first ghost kitchen called Burrito Baby right now, which has been a lot of fun to test that out. We have Burger Punk, which is kind of a little punk rock burger diner bar. Tiny, 1,500 square feet, really hurt through COVID. It was brand new too. It was only about 2 months old. Goro, the ramen shop. Tori Tori, which is the Asian American fried chicken shop that's in the former Goro space.
That's going to be my lunch.
Awesome. Love it. And I think that's it.
So 8 total.
And we're building a coffee shop right now that's next door to
Pony
here.
Boy.
Called Neon. No, Pony Boy was a bar that I created in like 2018, but we got out of that deal.
Okay. So 8-ish, 9-ish locations.
Yes.
Or concepts, we should say. Or location/concepts.
Correct.
So what I'm curious about, and this is like an area that I'm just looking to discover and learn more about, how do you approach new locations and partnerships? Because you identified earlier you're good at seeing talent in somebody and finding people and recruiting talent. How do you go into those partnerships? How do you guys cut it up? Like what's the model? What should it look like in your opinion?
That is a really interesting question, and it changes.
It's a little personal, and I recognize
it's
that.
It's okay, and I mean, not to get like, so-and-so made this much money last year, but as far as a percentage ownership, typically if I create a restaurant like around a chef, Jeff's a good example of this. Jeff, when we created Goro, even though he wasn't bringing any cash to the table, I knew that you have to kind of know your worth a little bit. What do I bring to the table? What did I do? Where's the money coming from for investment purposes? how much am I trying to retain, and then giving sweat equity to a partner, and like Jeff, right? Because without Jeff, I would have never built a ramen shop.
Exactly.
So you have to take that in consideration also.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend, and I've tried to structure this. I just haven't had any other partnerships. Jeff's my only operating partner. Everyone else is just an investor, a silent partner.
Gotcha.
So in our experience, though, moving forward, if I was going to build another restaurant with a chef or someone who had a great idea, I would most likely put sweat equity out there, but that it's not vested till a certain period of time.
Okay.
And then I also made a deal with Jeff in the beginning that he could purchase another 10% from my ownership after a certain period of time for the same amount that we charged like the outside investors to purchase it for in the beginning. And I liked that because it showed me that he was in it for the long haul, and that he did put his money sort of where his mouth is, and that even the money he had to pay for it was from the success of the restaurant.
Yeah.
So anyway, it could differ, but as far as outside investment, a lot of that comes down to your operating agreement. How's that structured? Mm-hmm. They're not really structured like this for us anymore, but like our first operating agreement was structured as majority rules.
Okay.
And I wouldn't recommend that for a lot of people.
What do you mean by that?
So like if you own 51%,
they choose.
Pretty much you can outvote everyone.
Gotcha.
Now, granted, like I haven't seen a lot of other people's operating agreements. I've seen some.
Yeah.
But as we moved forward with ours, we were like, wow, why do we do it that way?
So what advice do you have for people who are getting into an operation together and they're coming to an agreement? What advice do you have?
Man, you have to be very honest with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, I even look back at some of my conversations with Jeff when we were building our second restaurant about being very honest about who was going to do what and what was that worth, and who was bringing how much cash and what was that worth. And
not just having the conversation.
If you can't survive that conversation, then you shouldn't do it in the first place.
Also, committing it to writing. Don't just have the conversation,
Absolutely.
but have a pen and paper in your hand as you're going.
Yes.
You're responsible for this. Put your name next to that.
Yep.
I'm responsible for that. Put my name next to this. And that's accountability. That then you can come back to that later and be like, you said that you're responsible for this. Like, you need to put names next to responsibilities for accountability. Right?
There's nothing worse than looking at somebody who works with you or for you and going, what do you even do? That's like a very ugly, gross feeling to have, and it'll eat you up.
Yeah, but I think it's a really good. So I think a lot of people, when they think about shared equity, they think that's 50% that I'm missing, 50% that I'm not going to get. It's actually 50% that you would never otherwise had.
Right.
And I think you have to look at it that way, that without you and your talent, this concept wouldn't be a possibility, and I get to get 50% of that. And I think when you it's just a perspective change, right? That it's like night and day. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you said that pretty well. When I look at if I met a chef from Denver who I thought was talented, and I talked them into maybe moving here. I actually have a friend in Denver who's doing this awesome vegan pop-up.
Okay.
And I'm not vegan or vegetarian, never have tried that before. But what she's doing with food is like, one, so beautiful, two, very unique. And we don't have that here. And so, like, if I was going to call her and say, hey, remember that deal like a few years ago where I tried to get you to move here? Here's why. Anyway, let's say she did.
Yeah.
I would just want to make sure that, like, I know what I bring to the table is all the business experience part of it, reputation, just in town for what we've done so far, knowing the market, and then really our operational team that we bring with it.
Absolutely.
Right. And so to me, if I was going to list on paper what I bring, and then, and this is not to talk specifically about this person, but like if there was a chef and they were just a great chef but didn't have a lot of operational experience, if you're just writing down the different things that people do, and one list is 100 and one is 5, I mean, that tells you a lot about what you need to know about the ownership structure, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, this has been great.
And the other part of it, too, is, I say I never would have done a ramen shop without Jeff. Or, if there's a restaurant that I wouldn't have done without someone, well, that's okay, too. I just wouldn't have taken that risk.
Yeah.
So
I love this, and I realize you have an interview or a meeting you have to get to, so I want to make sure we leave time for COVID, and then we have a speed round. It'll be a true speed round. But back to COVID, and I think this is genius what you did. You recognize that the concepts that you had, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but from my perspective, what I'm picking up on is that you realized you needed to do something that was geared towards takeout or delivery of some sort. And just, I'm assuming that a fried chicken place was probably a solution for that.
Yeah, kind of. I mean,
feel free to correct me.
It was a solution. Okay, where do I start with that? So, okay, the part that we didn't talk about was that we had a Japanese pub that was called Gun.
Okay.
And at that restaurant, Jeff had been nominated for a Beard Award.
Okay.
And it had been open since July of 2020.
Gotcha.
No, excuse me, 2019. Ugh, forgot what year it is. I forgot what day it is.
It's going by fast.
It sure is. So we built this beautiful restaurant in the Paseo. Dinner only, 5 nights a week. And it was just this very experience-driven, educational. In the beginning, I used the word sexy, and everyone made fun of me. But it was just such a cool. It was so cool.
Yeah. Doesn't translate.
One
well.
of a kind, and people walk in there and say, "This feels like I'm somewhere else." That's always one of my favorite things for people to say. That's cool. It's transportive.
Yeah.
So we built this place, and it was doing okay. It wasn't until I really had time to step back and look at the numbers in March and April how much I realized we were floating it with our other restaurant, Goro. You know, or just even like how the staff was shared between the two places, or how that was working. And between that and then like management fees that weren't getting paid to the hospitality group that were just accrued, and then it painted a much uglier picture of what was happening there. And not only had I noticed all of that, like really on paper slowed down to look at it, also the heart of that Restaurant was the experience portion of it, and to me that was gone. And in my opinion at the time and now, I don't know when that will be back.
Yeah. So
we're sitting on a restaurant space in a building that we own that is, I don't know, it was the most expensive restaurant we'd ever built at that time. And I didn't know what to do with it. It looks like an Asian, Japanese, restaurant. And so I literally called Jeff and I was like, "Can I come sit on your porch? I'm bringing Japanese whiskey." And I went over there and just said, "I have an idea." And this was our passion project. I mean, I like stabbed Jeff when I told him this, and I said, "I think we need to close Gun, and it's not going to make it. It already wasn't making it. Here's how and why. But I have an idea, and I think it could be possible for us to basically move the ramen shop into this space." But why would I ever move it? I never would have moved it. I mentioned that earlier. It was doing fine where it was.
Yeah.
So I talked him into it. I mean, we basically came to that agreement, and we were able to just try to spend some time getting everything figured out. And it really sucked. I've never closed anything before. And, we have partners there that I really care about and who bet on us. And I always want to make people proud. And I just wasn't able to do that this time.
But I want to make sure I understand correctly. You took where Gun was, you put Goro there.
Correct.
Now, and then you opened the
chicken shop in the old Goro.
Because that was a takeout, carry-out friendly concept.
And because we still had a lease there that was not up.
Yeah, so I think that's when you have to start. You have to take 3 or 4 steps back, remove your emotion from the situation, and say, what would a smart business person do to survive in this moment in time? And you can always bring Gun back. You can always, like, it's not like it's dead. It's just on hold. It's on the back burner until the world is ready for it again.
Right. I mean, that's our hope, is that one day that, that something like that could come back into play. I mean, it had some very specific cooking equipment that's in the front and center part of the restaurant that we had to incorporate into Goro. So
looking to the future regarding COVID-19, and I don't want to spend a lot of time here because we have to bust out the speed round, but what are your thoughts on our response and like what we need to do to come out of this? And, do you have anything that you want to share? Advice or whatever? The
biggest thing I focus on so much right now is our efficiency and functionality. We're trying to employ as many people as possible safely. Yeah. But labor is also the killer for our business right now because our sales are 1/3 or maybe half. Some of the stores are better off than that, but for the most part, we're trying to keep all the same number of people employed and managers on the same salaries they had before, but we have the same rent and we have the same cost of goods. Cheese isn't like doing me any favors at Empire.
Why isn't the government
sure.
forcing like building or landlords to cut rent in half?
You got me there.
Like, I don't know. Like, we don't need to get into the politics.
I know it's so hard because it seems like it's so simple, but
right.
I mean it's not.
Yeah,
I know, and I am our landlord at one of the buildings, and so I see it from that standpoint as well. But do you want an empty building or do you want to get some rent? And so if they would just help us. Anyway, I know there's a lot to that and the new round of PPP loans and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, so really what we're looking at is taking advantage of outside sales. I don't foresee us packing this place anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Like, I really feel like quick service, third-party delivery, I've been on both sides of. I do, yeah, I do. And I've been on both sides of it and gone down that rabbit hole. But the outside sales part of it and the convenience of it for people is just not, it's going to keep growing. It's not going to go away. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so that's probably the biggest thing for us right now is really looking at everything and just trimming it like as thin as we can. And then trying to create sales in avenues that maybe we weren't taking advantage of before or doing it. Yep, totally. So.
Yep. Awesome. One question I asked before we go to the speed round. The mission statement again is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. How have you, Rachel, transformed since 2012 when you made the motions to open your first place?
Me personally, how have I transformed? I feel like I have a lot more empathy. I feel like I was always a person that said that I didn't because I wanted to be tough, and empathy, sounds like sympathy. But I really understand people a lot better. I'm a better listener than I was before, and I think that's I try to be more present and more meaningful in my actions. And again, like just the leading by example every day as much as I can, and just really trying to know when to tell myself no.
We're back. The first question. Before, one word to one sentence when answering these, and we'll be wrapped up quick.
Oh, I'm so nervous.
You got this. We're back, and the first question I have for you is, what is your it factor? A habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success?
Oh, I'm already going to stumble on the first one. I'm not very fast at this. Don't put me on a game show.
Figured it out in this.
I'm solution oriented.
I love it. What is your biggest weakness?
I care too much.
What is one question you ask or thing you look for when you're building your team?
Have you played sports?
What is your biggest challenge today?
Surviving COVID.
How are you overcoming that? You already answered that question. Share one code of conduct or behavior you teach your team, a core value, a way to be, a way to act.
Lead by example.
What is one uncommon standard of service you teach your teams? This is something that's common within the four walls of your restaurant as far as how to serve your guests, but not common throughout the industry.
Oh, man. This is like a long sentence.
Go for it.
We connect with all of the guests, and we have the managers write 6 guest interactions in a recap every night.
Does that get logged on the manager log?
It does.
I love that. Beautiful. What is one book that's a must read to make us a better person or restaurant owner?
Oh, man. I mean, Setting the Table. Classic.
It's classic. Do you have what's one your big lesson from that book?
Turning over rocks.
And I'm pretty sure that means like don't just take it for face value, like dig a little bit, right?
Yeah, basically he's fishing, and the fishing guy, he says, "What bait do I use here?" And the guy says, "Well, let's turn over these rocks and see what the fish are eating."
So, okay. I like that. That's right. What is one thing you feel restaurateurs don't do well enough or often enough?
Talk to the staff at their restaurants.
What is one service you've hired or outsourced? This isn't a technology. This is like a person that does something really well. Like, for example, Jeff. Was it Jeff that you reached out to for branding or the logo?
Yeah, so really we have a business consulting group that helps us grow.
Who are they? The
Matisse Group.
Beautiful. I lost him. What is one technology that you've outsourced? So this is something that has helped you communicate better, be more efficient, be more profitable, anything along those lines.
Payroll.
And who are you using?
We just switched to Paycom.
Paycom. And this is the last question. It's a doozy. I get lots of eye rolls. If you got the news, you'd be leaving this world tomorrow. All the memories of you, your work, and your restaurants would be lost with your departure, with the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you could leave behind for the good of humanity and for your legacy. What would they be? It's a tough one.
3 pieces of wisdom for humanity.
And your legacy. You're leaving. You're going to Mars.
Going to Mars. 3 pieces. I gotta go back to like the figure it out, so useful in so many aspects of life.
1.
Like never give up. 2, be kind to people.
2.
And 3 is be in the moment.
I love it. This has been a great conversation. We wrap up every chat by calling somebody out. Who is one person you respect and admire? And if you found out they were a guest on this show right now, you'd be like, let me know when that goes live. I'm listening.
Man, you probably know these guys. They actually reached out to me, but I've really enjoyed watching their pizza empire grow themselves. Is the Via 313, the Detroit style guys in Austin.
Brandon and
Brandon.
Oh my God,
I know
the brother Zane, Brandon and Zane.
Cool.
Yes,
Yeah.
Awesome dudes. I've had them on the show. They were awesome.
Oh, you know what? I think maybe that's why that stuck in my head, because I saw that on the list of people.
They're awesome dudes. Absolutely. Excuse me. Wow. Which I think is another example of just the power of reaching out to people, right? And like asking for help. You'd be surprised at how willing people are to help out, you know?
For sure.
So if we've really resonated with your message today and your story, and maybe we want to come join your team, maybe we want to poke you, what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, just shoot me an email at rcope@84hospitalitygroup.com.
Beautiful. And this is episode 778. Head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/778. We'll have a summary of today's discussion, as well as any links to tools, services, and how to connect with Rachel. Rachel, thank you so much. There is no questioning. You are unstoppable.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It was our pleasure.